It shouldn't be taken on the same level as that. It calls me out so bad. It's less, I envision Jesus being very good with children. I don't know how many people are mad about that. Simon's wife does exist. It brings me so much joy. That's why this exists. Hi guys, welcome back to another Nerd Rants video. Today we're going to talk about something that's a little controversial in the Christian community. We're going to talk about The Chosen. Yeah, I feel like in the Christian community, it's either, oh, this is great, it's amazing, I love that they were able to take the Bible stories and make it into this visual thing and blah 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 blah, or they hate it and they think it's like sacrilegious or something. So those are the two sides of the pendulum, and I don't think I've really seen anything in the middle. So, and with something this sensitive, it's kind of hard not to have just the two sides of the pendulum. It's pretty hard to have someone in the middle on something as like sensitive as this, because it's like it's the Bible, so people are very particular about that. So yeah, we'll just get it out there right out of the gate. I personally really enjoyed it. I really liked it. People are mad because of the creative liberties they take or whatever, because they're show creators. It's a different format for this story, and so yes, there are creative liberties that are going to be taken, and they're trying to take they're trying to take the 4 Gospels, which is really just like 3 years of Jesus' life, and they're trying to stretch it into multiple seasons, which then, again, makes it a little harder to do something like that without taking any creative liberties. So there's going to be some, and people are very mad because they're like, okay, they're taking all these creative liberties in there, so there's like all these disclaimers at the head of time and blah blah, and so it's like, why they even make it? I'm like, okay, one, the more because I'm currently rereading through Matthew, and I'll probably just go through all 4 Gospels, but just from what I've, I'm about halfway through Matthew, from what I've been reading, the more and more I read from the Gospels after I've, watched The Chosen, I feel like the less and less creative liberties that I see them taking. So it's like, yes, they took some. I feel like the biggest one they took is they kind of switched the timeline around a little bit. So like there are things that, just like we have Jesus heals the leper guy outside of Capernaum and says, hey, don't tell anyone about this. They switched that. That's in the Bible. It's after the Sermon on the Mount. In the Chosen, they do have him do that before, technically, which, they switched the timeline around a little bit just to flow better with what they're doing, and the format that they're putting it into, which, I mean, I don't think it's a huge thing, because it's still using what happened in the Bible, and I feel like anyone who's watching The Chosen, like, that it shouldn't be like watched with the same, and like taken on the same level as the Bible. Like, it shouldn't be taken on the same level as that. But I do love how they are able to take this and take really the meaningfulness of this and this story and this good news and put it into this visual thing. And the other big creative liberty that they took was with the disciples. Because we don't get a whole lot of information about the disciples themselves in the Bible, because the Gospels in the Bible, it's about Jesus, obviously, because it's Jesus' story. And so we get a whole lot of reference and a whole lot of indication of like who Jesus was and what Jesus was like, but we don't get a whole lot of information about the disciples and a whole lot of backstory. And so getting some depth to the disciples' characters, that's the other big thing they took, is they added backstory and whatever else to the disciples. And I personally really, really enjoyed that, because adding depth to the disciples' characters and really getting to dig into who they were as people and kind of explore, and again, take everything you watch with a grain of salt, because it's not the Bible. It's just like this recreation of this story that we all believe so wholeheartedly in, and it's just putting in a different format, something that we can see. And it's almost, in my opinion, to make, because in the Bible, the Gospels are like, this is Jesus about the story, this is what Jesus did. And then a lot of what happens in The Chosen is really just showing the effect of like, okay, here's people, here's real people. Let's develop these characters, let's show these characters as people and make them relatable to, people nowadays, like people here and now. Establish them as characters and then show how much Jesus affected their lives. So it's very much, I feel like, less about what Jesus did throughout the Chosen series and more about how it affected people. And I really, really love that. Just showing, because having the 12, of course, and having these characters fleshed out, I love it. I love it, and I find myself being able to relate to some of the things that go on and some of the things that they deal with. Like, personally, I'm kind of called out by Andrew, because I had the similar feel, like, grew up with this belief in God, grew up with this belief in that was, and he was one of the first ones introduced to the Messiah, to Jesus. And I relate to that with, I grew up in a Christian home, so I was introduced to Jesus pretty early on. It wasn't something I had to discover on my own. I was introduced to that, and seeing him still, having met Jesus, having believed from the first moment that he saw Jesus and was like, that is the Messiah. It's true. I believe this. And him being so excited when he sees Jesus again on the shore when he gets called to be his disciple. And yet throughout the journey, still seeing him struggle with his anxiety and still struggle with his worrying. It calls me out so bad, because anxiety is a huge thing for me. I've discovered in the last couple of years as I've taken on more responsibility in my job and had to actively go seek out community, because at my, at this weird age of young adult, and I didn't go to college, there's not a whole lot of opportunities for me to have that community. So me actively having to go out and do that, and me being pushed out of my comfort zone with cabin leading at a camp and being in charge of these middle school girls, and so many things that I've been doing in the last year or two have just, riled up all the anxiety inside of me that I've really kept bottled up my whole life, because I've been a little bit of a sheltered kid. And so seeing how a disciple, one of the 12, struggled with that, it's very meaningful to me. Do I just full on believe, yes, Andrew was a worrywart and blah, blah, blah? No, I'm not taking these backstories and whatever else to heart and saying that is how the disciples were. But based on what we see from the disciples in the Bible, I do think, especially with Peter and whatever else, I feel like it tracks fairly well with what they've done. What they've done tracks pretty well with what we do know of the Bible. We have Matthew, who's just straight up autistic, and he's super calculated and he's super awkward. And that's great for people who are neurodivergent and feel like outsiders, having that relatability and saying, yeah, no, this was always a thing. We just didn't always have a name for it. And seeing him being all calculating and factual, it's great. And it does line up with how he views the Gospels and how he tells the story. It's very factual. He has the genealogy of Jesus and all of that. And he goes through these things very factually based on, and as opposed to some of the other ones, John is very much, focused on love and, is a little more, flowery with the wording. And so it's very cool to say, this is the difference that we see between the disciples from the four gospels, and having them explore that and turn that into a character, it's very cool to me. And so I think the creative liberties that they did take, which I love, they took most of the creative liberties with like the timeline a little bit, and then with the disciples themselves. Most of the creative liberties happened there versus Jesus. Like, they didn't take a whole lot of creative liberties with Jesus, which I very much appreciate, and I love that they approached it that way. And they go, we're going to be very, very critical about how we use the character of Jesus in this show. It's like mostly bring him in for things that, you know, events that he's there for, events that we know about, have him saying as much like scripture as possible. And for not, they stretched one little like section of 2 or 3 verses into an entire episode. And Jesus was there for a little bit of it. Like, you get to see what he's doing, because it's really just, it's one of the passages, a short little passage in Matthew where it's just kind of says, yeah, he was camped here, and a whole bunch of people with demon possession, leprosy, sickness, whatever, came to him and healed them. And so we have that all happening in the background. We have all of this happening. It's like, this is what happened. But then we also have the disciples, these characters that they've established, and they're just discussing theological things. And so that it's, I love how they focus on the disciples versus focusing on Jesus, because then all these creative liberties that they take, they can then focus those creative liberties on the disciples. And so then it's less, I don't know, it's less, because they're not taking as many, really, any creative liberties with Jesus. And what they do take, they do have an episode where it's just Jesus camping in the woods, and he's interacting with kids. And I love it. Like, yes, I envision Jesus being very good with children, because God values children and their level of their faith, and having him just kind of like teach these kids as they, I do love the interaction. I do love it. I also love that they made Jesus just like one of the guys a little bit, because he's fully human. He was fully human. He came to earth fully human. Yes, he was fully God, but he came in a human body, physically, mentally, like everything was the same as us, but more. Basically, he came down as what we were supposed to be, us completed, essentially. And seeing him interact with the disciples in a fairly human way, like not sinful, but like having the community the way humanity was meant to have community, with him just like goofing off with the disciples at the end of an episode, because he heals the bleeding woman, and she goes and gets cleansed in the Sea of Galilee. And then they show up because they got told off by the Pharisees or whatever, and say, okay, you touched her, you need to go be cleansed. And so they kind of, more as a joke, go down to the Sea of Galilee to get cleansed, and they just, it's them running around and splashing in the water and being guys. And I personally like that, showing more of the human side of Jesus, because he's not just the Son of God. He came down as a human. Yes, he was the Son of God. Yes, he was fully God. But he was also human. And seeing him be like all the best parts of humanity and displaying that a little bit throughout the series was very cool. And I love that, because I love, one of my favorite concepts and one of my most mind-boggling concepts is Jesus came down as a human. He came down with the limitations. He chose to have all these limitations, and he chose to have all of these struggles that he had to deal with. So he struggled through so many things, and he understands us so completely, because he came down to live among us and to be one of us, but what we were meant to be, not what we had become. So I love seeing him portray humanity and having a sense of humor and just messing around with the disciples, and yet also being the Son of God. So I think they show the duality pretty well. I love that he shows his humanity when interacting with the disciples, but as soon as he comes up against someone that is opposing him, or is that challenging him, or that needs to have that more divine side of him, he has that power and he shows that authority. And so I love seeing both sides of it. Because it's not something we get to really see, as like we get told over and over and over again in the Bible. He was fully man, he was fully human, he was fully God. But getting to kind of see that a little bit is really great, and it's a great reminder that yes, Jesus was fully human. Does that mean Jesus was exactly like they're portraying him in the show? No, it doesn't. But I love that they're showing it, because it's something that in the midst of all of this, it can become kind of just like a head knowledge thing, where we're just like, oh yeah, he was fully human. It's just this, it's this thing that we know, but not realizing the depth of what that means. So I appreciate that they were able to take this concept and show it a little bit. So yeah, I like that. I like how they show that. Also, really, really fun thing that I found this week. I don't know if anyone's mad about the character of Eden, Peter's wife. Simon's wife. I don't know how many people are mad about that or not. I haven't looked really into all the negative reviews because I don't care. If I see them, cool, I'll read them, see what people's reasoning is, but it's not like something I really want to look into and get into that negativity, because if people in religious situations, when they don't like something, they tend to be really, really forceful and violent and like mudslinging. So I don't want to get into that. That's not the kind of thing I want to get into. But anyway, so I have no idea how many people are mad about the character of Eden. But Simon's wife does exist. Simon has a wife. He was married, which is something that I've read through the Gospels several times in my lifetime. That is something I always missed, because it's this it is like a 2-verse thing. It is a 2-verse thing that shows us that he's married. So there's a scene, they moved this one around too, because this section technically comes after the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, but they do this before in The Chosen. And again, I'm not super mad about it, because it does make sense with how they connect things in the show. But anyway, it's Eden, maybe not the character of Eden, but like the person of Eden as Simon's wife does exist. In Matthew 8 verse 14 and 15, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand and the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on him. Peter's married, and he did have his mother-in-law healed. I was so happy, because going into the show, finding, oh, he's married, that was the one thing I was like, okay, that's like the biggest change. Because I missed this verse so many times I miss this verse all the time when I read Matthew. But Peter is married. Peter legit was married. And I love that. And I love having that representation of a married disciple, because I feel like the image when we think of the disciples is, oh, there's these like 12 single guys that had nothing to lose except, their career or whatever. I mean, yeah, they left their homes and their families and their careers when they followed Jesus. But like, when there's a difference between leaving like your parents and your siblings and, this house you bought or this land that you own or whatever, and you career fishing. There's a difference between leaving your parents and your siblings and to follow this guy, and leaving your wife to follow this guy. So I love that it's actually a thing. And I love that we get to see that, and they make Eden an actual character, and they make her, it brings me so much joy that Peter is actually married, and that this detail of Eden being a character and is accurate. I love it so so much. And it made me so happy when I read that the other morning. So I love it. I love it so much. And if any of you are mad about the character of Eden, you're wrong. Peter was married, and his mother-in-law did get sick, and Jesus did heal her. And it's because of things like that, and finding this tiny little 2-verse thing that they took and they used is what makes me appreciate this show, because they clearly are deep into the Gospels and they're deep into the Word, and they're using this, every bit of it, to create this story. And so the created that, because of that, and using like every single verse as much as they can, it really slims down how many creative liberties they actually have to take. And it makes it so darn good and so fun when you find a detail and you, oh, I see how they used that. It's so fun. And because of that, because this dedication to using even like the smallest passage in the show, it really lends to how true they stay to the story of the Gospels. Because I think, despite, you know, some of the creative liberties that they take and maybe shifting the timeline a little bit, it still stays true to the story that they're trying to tell. Like, the depth and the meaning and the theme of the story of the Gospel, it's still there. It's so good. It's so good. It took me way too long to watch it. I tried to start it once, and then I got distracted by something else, and then I sat down and like, no, I am watching this. Yes, the episodes are an hour long, but I am watching this, and I'm so happy I did. Oh man, it's so good. It's so good. I think I've got through my rant about creative liberties. The last thing I want to say is, technically, for all the people mad about creative liberties, technically, the English translation of the Bible, because it is not in the original language, has creative liberties in it. It is not word for word the literal translation of the Hebrew or whatever language, because it was written into several different languages, but it's not word for word the exact translation of what the original language it was written in was. So therefore, they shift things so that it makes sense, so that it's not gibberish when you read it. So therefore, technically, whoever translated your Bible into English took some creative liberties. They had to shift it so that it fit the format that they were trying to put it into. In this case, the English language. They had to shift it around just a little bit to fit this format that they're putting it in. In the same way, the creators of the Chosen series are taking the story down to like 2-verse passages, and they're shifting it just a bit so that it fits this new format they're putting it into. Because book format is very, very different from like cinematic format. So they shift it a little bit, and they do have to change a couple things so that it fits this format they're putting it into. Yes, some of these creative changes are made a little bit for drama, but that's because that's the format they're putting it into. They're putting it into this visual cinematic format, and so sometimes you need to make it just a little dramatic, just a little bit. Not necessarily like keep people enthralled, but just because that is the format you're putting it into. And so, yeah. Yes, there are moments where it's just like, oh, they did that to be dramatic or whatever. But it's never anything where I'm just like, that's just straight up wrong, and that's not a part of Christianity, and why would they say that? They stay true to the story. They're human, they make mistakes. Sometimes they might say something that gets worded wrong, or it's taken wrong, because we're human, we all make mistakes, and that's fine. We're not perfect. That's why this exists. So, yeah. Okay, that's it. That's all I got now. I'm sorry. I'm done ranting about creative liberties, I swear. We're just gonna throw out my favorite scene so far. My boyfriend asked me this when I was about halfway, when I had like finished season 2 and was getting into season 3. I haven't watched season 4 yet. I'm waiting for it to come out free because fortunately it's delayed and I won't get to do that till like May or June. But anyway, or end of May, end of this month, early June. Anyway, not important. So far, so I've gotten through season 3. My favorite part so far, because I have one now, Peter. My favorite part so far is when Jesus calls Peter, Simon, whatever you want to call him. When Jesus calls Simon out of the boat in the storm to walk on water. One, because they have lead up where Simon's been struggling with the loss of his unborn child. I love, again, adding something in that can be relatable for somebody. That's, I think, the biggest concept of this is like, okay, take this, make it relatable for people, and then use that to show how Jesus affects their lives and how we can spread this message. I like it. Anyway, leading up with that and having him struggle with, like, not even his faith in Jesus. Like, I know you are the Son of God. I know you're the Messiah. My faith is not the issue. It's the fact that he felt unseen. Again, a super, super relatable thing for literally everyone. Especially with a God who has far more knowledge, who is all-knowing, and knows what's good for you. Far better than you do. And knows that sometimes you have to go through crap in order to become stronger. So, but yeah, having all that lead up and then him literally going, my faith isn't the problem. It's having to watch you help all these strangers when I am standing right here struggling and you're not doing anything about it. And he goes out and he walks on the water, and because of all of this stuff that's happening in his life, he takes his eyes off Jesus and he starts to sink. We also have him going back and forth between him and Eden, who's doing like a ritual cleansing because of the miscarriage. And that having some parallels between the two of them and them going into the water and all of that. So anyway, Simon goes down and Jesus pulls him out. And from the moment his head breaks the water to the end of the scene, like, we don't see him stop. He is clinging to Jesus just over and over again, saying, don't let me go. Don't let me go. All the way back to the boat, sitting in the boat, just clinging to Jesus like a child who just found their parent, like just found their father again after being lost in the store or something, just clinging to him with this desperation, just saying over and over again, don't let me go. It got me so freaking bad, guys. I love it so much, like, even talking about it, I'm tearing up. Oh my gosh, it's so good. I love it so much. It is by far my favorite scene in the entirety of the series so far. I haven't seen season 4, so I guess not the entirety, but the entirety that I've seen. It's so good. I literally looked it up a couple days later on YouTube to rewatch it because I'm like, I need to see this scene again. It was so great, and I loved it so much. Okay. I think that's all I got. That was a 20-minute rant about creative liberties, and I'm sorry if was boring for you. I needed to get all of the thoughts out about it. If you want to continue the discussion respectfully in the comments, feel free to do that. I would love to get involved. I would love to talk about issues you had, things you loved, what disciple you relate to the most with these backstories that they've been given, favorite scene so far. Be careful with spoilers. I need to see season 4 yet. any and all discussion. Like, are there random verses that you have found while reading the Gospels where it's like a 1 or 2 verse thing and you went, they turned that into a whole thing and they made it this whole thing in the series? I'd love to find more of those. I love those little tiny details so much. But yes, just share your thoughts in the comments. Do it respectfully. If you are not a fan of the show, please do not start bashing anyone in there. You can feel free to share your opinion. Be respectful about it. We're adults. Be an adult. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Chosen. Drop yours along with any recommendations or suggestions that you have in the comments. I post videos on this channel on Wednesday and Saturdays, and I post videos on my audiobook channel on Thursdays. I'll see you all next time.